Hi, my name is Kwanda Hood, and I am here with my very good friend V. And this is The Call, a podcast between two friends. In this particular episode, we are going to talk about the Unbreakable Vow, Love and Conflict. To give a little bit of insight on me, I am a community member who lives in the North Liberty area. I do try to do as much community service work as I can in North Liberty, Coralville, and Iowa. And I think, how long have we known each other?
More than a pandemic's worth.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But, it's one of those relationships where
Longer.
I think we could not talk for like 3 months and come back
Mhm.
together and pick right up where we were. So we thought that
Absolutely.
this would be a great opportunity to have some really good conversations with each other. V, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. V fix my rise. My pronouns are they, them, and I am currently a Johnson County supervisor in Iowa. I also wanted to just quickly, hold some space for the ancestral land that we're on. We are on, Iowa, Chippewa, and Oceti-Sakowin unceded territory in the city I am sitting in right now, which is Iowa City in the state of Iowa. So I'm a county supervisor, and I come from an organizing background. I'm a community and environmental planner by trade. And let's see, I feel like I should start saying I'm a trans queer elder as I approach 50. And so I guess I'll put that out there. I'm also Filipinx American and a parent of two young humans. And I'm partnered and I have beloveds in my life. And I'm very excited to be here with you, Kwanda. And thanks so much for saying yes to this. I think that in a time when so much of our attention is being pulled in so many different ways, it's such a joy to be able to do this with you. So thanks for saying yes.
Before we get going, for folks that maybe might not understand what unceded means, do you want to just briefly explain that?
Oh, yeah. Unseated, right? Because we had talked about how you could spell that so many different ways. Unseated as in it was taken, it was not given. Yeah, I think that that's probably the best way to put it. We have an American culture of ownership that oddly applies to things like land and water and air and other beings, plant medicine that is detrimental, I think, to the health of the planet and also harmful to those of us that are in it. And being in a capitalist society, I think that there are a lot of ways that we have to kind of take note of our surroundings to check, how we got here and where we are and who we surround ourselves with. So I like to just identify the people that came here before me and how they have taken care of the place that I'm in. And I think that is a little bit part of my planning background because it's kind of like Civics 101. When I see crooked roads, I think, oh, how did that happen? Like Muscatine Avenue, for those that are in Iowa City, it's like, well, that was probably, a horse and carriage route to some, post, mail post or trading post. And before
Yeah.
that, it was probably, a path traveled by indigenous people. And before that was probably, deer or bison trail or something like that. So to think back as to where we come from, I think is really essential, especially in this day and age when, here we are sitting in different rooms, talking across time and space very easily. I think that sometimes we can get away from that. And I'm not saying that we need to, thumb our nose at technology, but I do think that it helps ground us as human beings to know where we come from and where we are. So I try
Yeah,
and do that as
absolutely.
much as I can.
100%. And
Yeah.
and when you were saying that about how our society kind of just takes things, co-ops them, appropriates them, whatever words you want to use. But in grad school, I had a very interesting class about communication
Mhm.
where we studied the differences between Western and Eastern culture. And one of the most significant differences, aside from America kind of being more individualistic, more driven towards, this definition of success, which really doesn't mean anything, and then an Eastern culture, which tends to look at themselves within the community, and the community is very important to them. it just what you were talking about just reminded me of that because I think that there's somewhere in between is where we probably wanna land,
Mhm.
but I think to your point, when you think about things with that Eastern perspective,
Mhm.
you recognize your connection not only to the community around you, but the environment that you live, and you
Mhm.
recognize that I'm a steward. I'm just here to take care of this. And I think that's really meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think any sort of culture that is non-Western, whether that's, the Southern hemisphere, the South Asian, whatever, there is absolutely much deeper connection to community. Not to say that we don't have it, we
Right.
do. And that's what I'm so excited about this podcast, because I think what we're trying to do is have a conversation about how are we in community with one another. And particularly in this political moment when, we have an authoritarian in office for the second time, and this time much more prepared, and this time much, much more harmful. And that the boot of authoritarianism on your neck really, I think, highlights who are we as a community? How are we going to respond? And so I think that's why I'm really excited about this podcast, because, the idea behind it was that we would talk about, in general, kind of how we're going to treat each other and what are some of those best practices that keep us in community, that keep us on a healing path, on an accountability path, on being in right relationship with one another in ways that are kind and compassionate and also vigilant. And I think that there can be tension there, but I think that that tension can also be healthy. I don't want to say productive, because we focus so much on productivity in our, American society. And one thing I wanted to add too is, we talk about community and how we're going to be in it as an elected official, especially at the county level. I mean, I know a lot of people don't understand what being a county supervisor is, but if you ever see our meeting, we meet every week, twice a week, Wednesday and Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Please come stop by or check it out on Zoom. I can't promise the most exciting meetings, but sometimes they get spicy, or there's some interesting stuff that happens. Always when the community comes, it is where I want to be. And truly, I feel as though this position that I am in, I remind myself that there were people sitting around fires, and that there were those that the people in my position were handing out medicine, or were talking about crops, or were trying to figure out how to strategize around, whatever ails you or whatever is ailing our community, that there are people that are asking for help or asking for guidance. And that's a very sacred position to be in that I don't take lightly. I think of being a public servant as an act of love. And I think that there are many acts of love that we all do, regardless of whether or not you're a public servant. But I do think that there's an element of being in this position that you have to really set your ego aside and look at what is before you, and gather as much information as possible, listen to the hearts and minds of those that it's impacting, and uplift those that need to be uplifted, while making difficult decisions. I think that that is a piece of this conversation that I'm really interested in, because I want to speak to my other elected officials, but this is also just about how families work together as well. When you think about a community as almost just a much larger
Mhm.
family, and how do we speak to each other? How do we treat each other in person or via email, or, on social media, especially, I think makes a difference in this moment in particular. I hope always, but I think that when there's so much fear, when there's so much people on the front lines being already exhausted, and donors who are, afraid to give, or not sure what to do with their funding, or how to get things through the federal government. There's just a lot of fear that is alive right now, and I think that it really sets people's teeth on edge.
Yeah.
I've seen in the last 10 months more people going after each other than I feel like I've seen in the last 10 years. And
Agreed.
I've seen it in our own community, and
Mhm.
it's it's heartbreaking. And I hope that we can help folks and have the conversation and try and cultivate some skills around that with what we're doing here today, which I've already talked too much. I'm not sure if that's possible in a podcast, but I feel that way already.
No, all great information, and things were popping into my head left and right, but we really want to explore in this episode of how to honor the vow of love, not just as a feeling, but as an active restorative practice when
Mhm,
conflict inevitably arises. And what struck me in what you just said was about the idea of tension, and that
mhm.
it's not that you want to look at it in terms of, well, how can we progress past this? But I think the times and moments in my life where I have felt tension, either internally or externally, I think it's the universe's way of saying you need to stop, think, take a breath, see what's going on, self-reflect, do all these things, love yourself, love your community, and figure out where that tension is coming from before you spout it off at the mouth or hit the keyboard or all those things, right? So talk about love as an action as opposed to a feeling.
There's so much that has come before us. Bell Hooks does a wonderful job of talking about love as a verb. And when I was in my early 20s, she wrote a book called All About Love, New Visions. And I remember it clearly. At the time, I wasn't in formal education or school setting, but I felt like I was going to the school of Bell Hooks. And what she wrote in there is that love is a verb, that, the act of love is showing, or cultivating trust and respect and dignity and, deeply listening, those values that you cultivate within a relationship, whether that be with one person or many people or an organization or what have you. And in it, she talks about creating schools of love. And that really just opened my eyes to a lot of things, because I realized that there are many things that we don't get taught in school. The idea of a formal education, I mean, Kwanda, I think you took an entire course on this in grad school, so I won't even try and open that lid there. But just to say that I think that fundamentally how we arrive to our work in general is how we do the work. And so if we are cultivating cultures that don't understand what love is or how to cultivate relationships through acts of love, then you're going to have a loveless society, which is essentially what she
Yes.
argues. And let's look around. It's a fair critique, right? And you can go back to I don't know how far and look at factions and war and all of those aspects of human nature. But when you're looking at a community, what does that look like? And so I think that is one aspect of it, is to actually do the internal work. And that's another thing that is highly important. In order to give love, you have to have self-love. And there's a lot of self-help books, there's a lot of things out there, and it sounds hokey, but I think truly that's what we're going to need. And I'm not the first to say this, and I won't be the last, about the, sort of a love revolution. But I think that at the core of wanting to care for people, wanting to provide healthcare, wanting to provide dental care or access to education or whatever that may be, that's honoring another human and saying, I want you to have what I have, or I want you to have what you need to be successful in life, whatever that is. And that is love. As
Yeah.
much as, people might not want to label it as such, I think it takes a fair amount of that to actually have that mindset and then put that into action. So
Yeah.
I highly recommend Bell Hooks as a good starting place. There are many, many others, but that's a place to look.
Yeah. And I think we'll hit a couple of those as we go through that. Talk about defining love as a conscious will. And the reason why I like that statement so much is this idea that the work that we do has to be intentional. It
Mhm,
can't be something that you're not willing to step into uncomfortableness, either with the group that you're talking to or the people that you're with,
mhm.
without saying, I'm coming in here with love and an open mind, and I'm going to try my best to have conversations with folks. So what do you think about that as a will?
Yeah. Well, I do want to clarify, I'm not at all talking about romantic love. I'm not talking about falling in love, right?
Yeah.
That's for another podcast, which I'm sure there are many. But love as an act, as you said, a will, is having to really You and I actually have done trainings together for organizations to have these difficult conversations. And I think first of all, I always recommend if people are going to do that to do it with a wing person because people are going to say some stuff and you're going to be like, okay, I gotta address that. And you're going to need to like process that later. So for your own
Yeah,
mental health, if you're doing trainings and uncomfortable conversations, please don't go alone. So I've had the fortunate experience of being able to work with Kwanda on this. And we've talked quite a bit about how the uncomfortable conversations are what we need to have in order to unpack, as we had talked about earlier, that internal work. So if you're coming to work and that's how you're going to do the work, all of the implicit biases, all of the experiences, all good and bad and ugly, are how you arrive to the work. Your intentions don't always equal impact, but I think that for the most part, people have good intentions when they come and do work, or if they're gathering with families or friends or whatever it is. So I think that there are tools, and you and I have talked about them and taught them. But when we start talking about, white supremacy culture and what that is, and how that truly negatively impacts every single one of us, that's when things start getting uncomfortable. And I think
yeah,
you have to operate from a place of our liberation is tied. I think that for some reason is really hard for people to understand. And I kind of don't understand how they don't understand it, but I try and give people grace and space to get there
yeah,
is, I I don't know how you don't understand that. Like, we live in a society that is so toxic that any improvement that we do, whether that's wage equity for immigrant farmers or, improved childcare settings, those aspects are only going to improve everybody's ability to live better. And that is a trickle up. That is a trickle out. It's a ripple out effect. And we could certainly give more concrete examples. One actually that is coming to my mind that won't let me go is I was at a protest with high school and middle schoolers. This was when
mhm,
Iowa was doing the trans youth access to healthcare bans and the bathroom bans. This was
mhm.
right when I got into office in 2023. And it took my breath away. I mean, it was awful, of course, to go after our youth, and they organized themselves, and they did walkouts, and they, created WTF Iowa, which is, like, my favorite, like, student-led organization across the state of Iowa, and they were just doing it on, like, WhatsApp and all this other stuff. Like, it was amazing how they were organizing themselves, and, I would speak, but it wasn't about me. I came to listen, and I learned so much from them, and I remember one trans youth in particular was so visibly angry because they simply wanted to run track, and they wanted to run track with the boys because that is how they saw themselves. And they were forced to take a group photo with their, sex assigned at birth group, and they never went back. And what they were kind of, shaking and yelling about was the fact that not only like the indignity of that, of having to be forced into a box that they did not fit in, but they made a very clear line that what Kim Reynolds was doing was also shackling her own self in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant. Like, to make that leap, to say that because you are being this is such outright misogyny, what you're doing, especially because they were attacking trans women in sports, that
Mhm.
you it cuts across. And that a 15-year-old was like, "And even Kim Reynolds, I wouldn't want you to have to be barefoot and pregnant. And so I would never have passed this legislation because it is all tied together." And it blew my mind. I was like, "You," and talk about compassion. I mean, talk about somebody that was like, "You just took away my rights." And I'm
Right.
connecting that to like, I wish that you and I were both liberated.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it shook me. So, thank God for the youth. But so I think that when we look at that aspect of it, there's so many tools that we can utilize. You and I have talked about Tema Okun's white privilege and how she utilizes anecdotes basically in the workplace. When we talk about white supremacy culture, we're talking about perfectionism. We're talking about
Assimilation.
well, assimilation, yeah, and timeliness and production in general, right? Like
Yeah.
this high performance that's always like on, 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 on. She has antidotes to that that really speak to how are we going to dismantle that? And so you and I have had a lot of these uncomfortable conversations. And I think that that tension that you're talking about is what we need to embrace. And it's okay to be uncomfortable
Yeah.
because that's speaking to something inside of you. And what is needs to be cultivated is the ability to turn in and listen and
Yeah.
say, what is coming up for me?
Yeah.
Before I react, much like you said, before I do my knee jerk reaction, and when we do our training, we sit people down and they have to write it out. Like, what would I do? And then they share it. And
Yeah.
they realize that it's like, oh, I shut down or I lash out or I walk away. It's like, okay, well, can we cultivate some better strategies, some better tools when you
Yeah.
are uncomfortable and trying to stay present, focus on your
Yeah.
breath, maybe feel your toes, try and identify where in your body this is coming up to note
Mhm.
for later. Maybe I should bring that to a therapist, whatever that is, or a really good friend. I don't know. But, there are certain strategies when people are like, well, I'm just, I am who I am. It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, you are what you make it. So there are tools out there that I would do want to point to. And I know we had talked about keeping that in the notes and making that accessible
Yeah.
for folks.
Yeah.
But we do want people to have some tools in their toolbox, so
Yeah.
to speak. And we're just touching on these.
Yeah.
And certainly if folks have questions and want to reach out.
Yep, drop it in the comments and we'll have an email address at the end that you can email us. I love what you're saying. I don't remember who said it, but I remember watching someone who was talking about self-reflection and they said you have to take your boogeyman out of the closet and you got to poke them and play with them and talk to them and figure out where this is all coming from. What's resonating for me right now is, I experienced some childhood trauma and I thought that I was on it. I was dealing with it. I was great. Nothing was wrong until menopause began. And then I realized that I was forgetting things. I could not keep my mind focused. And with the therapist I began working with on what was diagnosed as PTSD, I came to realize that all of these things that made me think I had my shit together were all coping mechanisms from
Mhm,
my trauma. And at that stage, I was ready, willing, and able to say, okay, let's talk about these things. Where did they
mhm,
come from? Why am I still doing them? Why am I attached to them? Reflection
mhm,
is so important. In grad school right now, every single class I have, we read something and we reflect. And that's supposed to be our way of journaling or getting out what we're thinking, what we're feeling based on those readings. And we're very intentional about where we're going to talk about next, which is in that environment, how do we call in, call out what's best, what's not? How do you call in from a place of love and a place of wanting both of us to get stronger and better and do better and all of those things? So talk a little bit about calling in and calling out and which one you think works better.
Well, I think it's really a matter of time and place. I think, we're on the Call podcast, right? And I had named the Substack newsletter, the Call, and that is a part of it is like, how are we calling on each other? Yeah, sort of the cute, like, are you going to pick up the phone is also another way to look at it. When we talk about calling in, calling out, or calling on, that actually, I've been really kind of doing a deep dive into Dr. Loretta Ross's work on this. She has a book that's fantastic. It's calling in and calling in people that you don't like or something like that. I can't remember. And so we'll put that in the chat or in the notes as well. But the premise really is that calling in is basically calling out in like a compassionate way. And there's a time and a place for it. I am much more attuned to calling people in than I am to calling people out. But I do think that it is an important tool to kind of have that vigilance and to say, hey, something is going on here
Ah,
and we need to know what's going on. or
Yeah.
I need more information, or there's something not right, you know? And so I do think that there is a time and space for calling out. Calling in is what I try and lean into more so. And I get a lot of practice of this where you kind of gently say, tell me more about that. Or
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it like that. It takes deep listening. One thing that I've really found is that, everybody's hurt. Everybody. Everybody hurts.
Mhm.
And we operate out of that oftentimes. And so when I find that I'm having contentious public conversations, which happen quite a bit, I try and listen to where is the hurt coming
Right.
from?
Yeah.
You kind of have to listen between the lines on that and get to a place where you can acknowledge the hurt or you can acknowledge what they're bringing up and what they're saying. Oftentimes people just want to be heard.
Yeah.
And then you can start asking more questions if you think that that's helpful. You're basically trying to get people to A, de-escalate, and B, get to a place where you can actually have a conversation. And it's a challenging thing because especially in the public setting, nobody wants to look stupid. Nobody wants to apologize. Everybody wants to be right. All of these things are true. And that's actually false. I think that, one thing that I've learned about being in office is like the more we can actually mirror humanity, like the better off we will be. And a bit of that is what I call vulnerable leadership.
Yeah.
We have talked about this in our training. Like you grew up in planning as a facilitator and was trained to be objective, was trained to get people to design a park or to a trail or whatever, a building. And when I started working in the spaces of, DEI trainings and all those kinds of stuff, I realized that I was taught actually a mentor, Kelly Palmer, who is another person we can connect in the notes here. She's phenomenal. I kind of call her the Oracle sometimes. We would do trainings together and she would just drop in just, bombs. And I would just be like, that is amazing. Like, yes, you are telling the truth. You're giving an example. And she would always be vulnerable. She would always tell a personal story. In those moments when you're in an uncomfortable space with a bunch of white people in the room that are like questioning racism or
Mhm.
sexism or transphobia, like it feels like daggers aimed at your heart. And her thing was, that's right. And so grab the handle, like
I love it.
give into it. And it works every time. And even when it fails, it works because
Yeah.
failure often looks like, oh, dang, you got told, or, like somebody turned that against you. But at the end of the day, I've always found that if not the person that I'm talking to, and I'm talking about a lot of public meetings, if not the person that I'm
Right.
talking to or who's talking with me gets to a place of can say, okay, let's calm down here, or let's get to the heart of the matter. There's somebody watching who is like, wow, you were really vulnerable in that moment.
Yeah.
You said, I
Yeah.
don't know, or you said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You apologized. And it's like, that is not hard. It's really
Yeah.
not. I don't know why. Again, I do know it's white supremacy culture. And especially when you get into politics, it's like the worst of the worst comes out
Yeah.
because it's dog eat dog or something like that. But not in our community. I don't really think that there's a place for the viciousness in our community. And I don't think that's even calling out. I think that's just being mean and popping off. Like, I think calling out is a little bit more specific, trying to get a thing or
Right.
get to a place or, to push an agenda. But there are sometimes where I think people are just being jerks. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I agree with you. The storytelling is so impactful.
Yeah.
I know that I have had people in my past who I have shared issues with my suicide ideation and the attempts that I've made, and them coming up to me later or right after and saying, I felt that way too, and I
Mhm.
thought I was all alone. That makes such a difference to people, and I think it begins to build this trust that you really can't build any other way than
Yes.
exposing the fact that I'm human, I'm vulnerable, I make mistakes, and
Mhm.
that's okay, as so long as we're acknowledging when we do that, I'll give you a great example. Last night, I was at an event and there was a gentleman there who's very kind. I've seen him numerous times. We're not friends, but we're acquaintances. And he speaks very softly. And sometimes it almost sounds like there's a little bit of accent in the way that he talks, but I think it's really more that he's just very soft spoken. So in that environment, I said, we were chit chatting about the weather, talk because I don't like it when it's cold.
Very
And
I
I said, yeah. And I said, where are you from? And he answered, and we had a little bit more of a conversation. And then the event was over. I left and I got in my car and I went, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I asked him that. And I get asked that often, as I'm sure you do as well.
Mhm,
And I know what it feels like, even if we're trying to be compassionate and empathetic and looking at it as a teaching moment.
mhm,
I drove home and really mentally took myself to task because
mhm,
I should know better.
mm,
And so today, this morning, I sent him an email and I apologized. I said, I should know better than this. I meant no harm. I was really more interested in your background, not from a place of, are you supposed to be here?
mhm,
And he responded back and he said, I understand. I get it. And no harm, no foul. I really appreciate that you reached out to me.
yeah,
I think it takes a lot of courage to do that, and it's hard. It's not
mhm.
easy, but it has to be done, especially where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great example. I try and tell people too, like, I mess up pronouns all the time, because I want people to know that, like, it's okay. What is perfectionism? It's a model that is spoon-fed to us that only
Yeah.
harms us because we're trying to strive for something that's not real.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really appreciate that example, the ouch and the I'm sorry. There's a lot of other things, we had talked about, Tema Cohn, there's Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Back Knapsack,
Yeah.
and she talks about a lot of the
Great
privileges
metaphor.
that are in there. I bring that up because there's there's a part of that I think she talks about apology and how we don't know how to apologize, or there's stigma around apologizing. And there's actually like really deep meaning in trying to address a harm. And you know, I think that what I really want people to understand is harm is going to happen. What matters is how we handle that, how
Right.
we handle the repair. I think I've really worked hard on being able to identify an ouch and to be able to name what it is and then to trust that people will respond, because how else will people get to know you if you don't if you know other, or we're just robots,
Yeah.
but unless I'm expressing something, whether that's joy or sadness or a hurt, like, we have to be able to bridge the divide, or else we're just masking all the time.
Yeah.
And we do that, right,
Yeah.
as humans, as people that are underestimated. People have certain ideas about who we are just based on the color of our skin or the haircut or the whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so we mask all the time
Yep.
because it's hard to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so it
It's
seems very counter
exhausting.
it is exhausting. It is exhausting to mask. And the counterintuitive almost of like, this is like we're going to a knife fight with our chest open. It's like in this political moment, it's like, ICE is coming down to our marketplaces and,
Yeah.
all of this stuff is so real and in our faces. And we're saying like, we have to have more compassion. We have to take care of one another. We need to start making the soup broth and, tending to babies and like really just kind of distill what are the most important things right now. And the most important things are taking care of each other,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
how do we do that?
Yeah, and take care of ourselves.
Yes.
And just to put a little bit of a fine point on that, one of the things that I have learned and really try to live by is sorry doesn't matter
Mm,
if you don't change the behavior. And that doesn't mean you have to do it overnight. It doesn't mean you have to do it immediately. It just means that you're willing to step back and look at what has happened and say, what can I do? How can I make it so that I don't do this again? And I
mhm,
learn from it to change my behavior. I think that's very important because I think a lot of people apologize. A lot of
mhm,
people say they're sorry, And then you see them a week later and they do the same exact thing again, and
Mhm.
you call them in again and they do
Mhm.
it again. And you're trying to teach, you're trying to educate, but you really have to change that action. That's, I think, what shows people that
Mhm.
you are really willing to do the work and step to it with
Mhm.
an open heart and an open mind.
Yeah, and I think that there's also there's a certain amount of trust that you have to generate to say, like my wife is like, you have a tone, right? Like, really bothers me that I don't hear that tone. Really
Yeah.
bothers me. She's like, yeah, it bothers me too. So, but I have to say, well, since I don't hear it, can you just like gently tell me? And she's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I'm gonna gently tell you you have a tone when we're deep into a painful moment." And I'm like, "No, I trust that I will hear you and I will step back." Right. And so that's the kind of stuff that you need to like communicate about and
Yes.
also like generate that trust. Obviously, that's my partner of like 20 years. So
Right.
like there's a lot of trust and depth there. But like I think that we can do that though in other relationships,
Right.
whether that's publicly, privately, whatever. But that's I need help. I don't know what I don't know. And it's not to be ignorant of it, but there are things, again, that vulnerability of saying like, oh well, can you help me? And I promise that when you try and help me, I'm going to hear that and be like, you asked her to tell you that you have a tone, so you can't get mad at her for it.
Yeah.
And that takes like and it
Yeah. Yeah.
works. It
Yeah,
does.
absolutely.
It does. I mean, and it doesn't work every time, but it works 9 times out of
Yeah.
10.
And I think we also have to remember that it is okay if
Mhm.
it hits you the wrong way. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, there's
Again,
probably
that
something behind that.
perfection. Right.
Right. But your feelings are valid no matter what you're feeling. And so even if that, just raises your hackles, that's still important. And as you stated earlier, that's kind of a little bit of a clue to start digging and figuring out, okay, well,
Yes.
where is this really coming from?
Right.
And you want to
Right.
do things to make them happy and have a great relationship. And sometimes they see things that you're not able to see because you're stuck in your own head sometimes.
Yeah. Many times.
We're going to wrap up this segment and take a little break. When we come back, we are going to dive into talking about love as mutual aid and sustainable care. All right, welcome back. We're so glad that you're sticking with us. I just want to give a little disclaimer. This is our first podcast, so just give us a little grace. We're figuring stuff out and we're working through things, but we can only get better as we go along. And getting feedback of things is also helpful, so feel free to drop that in the chat or to email the address that comes up at the end. So when we were talking in the first segment, B, so many times the things that you were saying, the word that was popping up in my head was mutual aid. And this idea of the community coming together as a collective to prop up what the community needs if it's lacking in resources or um, whatever it may be. I've heard you talk about it, whether it's I need a car or I don't have groceries. Somebody help me. You have a farm. Can I get your eggs?
Mhm.
Those types of things. So talk about mutual aid as building solidarity during this time of crisis.
Yeah, I mean, you know, community is really the antidote to capitalism. I firmly believe that it's not about the wealth of our community, it's about the distribution. Mutual aid really cuts across that because it says you have something, and if I have, you need something, and if I have it, I can offer that. And vice versa. And so I've seen so many versions of mutual aid. I've seen mutual aid boards, like you said, that are like, hey, I need a car. And somebody's like, well, I'm getting rid of a car. It's like, wow. Or, whatever. It could be clothes, it could be food, it could be money. One of the things that I am really proud of in my tenure as a county supervisor is getting the transgender advisory committee off the ground in our county. And
Yeah.
that was really born out of a refusal to issue another proclamation for Transgender Visibility Day. I just could not take another year of trying to act like this was a good thing in this state, that
Yeah.
being invisible was somehow less harmful, even. The targets on our backs are very real. There were many times, when I had talked about doing the walkouts with the youth, and I've spoken in Senate hearings here at the Capitol. It's been a tough road. They stripped gender out of our civil rights at the
Speaking.
state. So they don't stop, and I don't think they're going to stop. And I mean, so much so that when I was doing those marches and walkouts and I was speaking, Natalie would bring our kids who are, 7 and 10. And
Yeah.
at one time she was like, hey, I'm starting to like kind of struggle with this. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was just like, what happens if you get shot? Like, do I take care of you or do I take care of the kids? Like, I mean, that I just want people to understand like how it feels to be trans in Iowa. Obviously, I'm much more visible, but there has been heightened attention around, and we're a very gun-loving state. So there's realness in that. But the Transgender Advisory Committee was born out of that frustration, and just our state is so unsafe for trans folks that I was trying to figure out how do we make it safer. And so I turned to the community and I said, nobody knows it better than we do.
Yeah.
So I said, how do we have community members work with our county officials and, nonprofit leaders and figure out how do we address the safety issues? And right now we're doing bathroom mapping. They've had the human rights ordinance has been uplifted, and we've done resolutions, and, we're working with youth, and like, there's a lot of things. It's been actually about a year and a half that they've worked together. And one of the things that we worked on really hard was trying to get funding to Iowa Trans Mutual Aid, because we understand how important that is. Mutual aid, again, cuts across so much, because it's just, if you have it, and somebody needs it, it just is
Yeah.
given, because we recognize that these are our people and we have to care for one another. It's very unusual to look at a local government and say, like, how can you give funding to mutual aid? And we did our best, and I can't say that it was exactly perfect, but we did get to a place where we were able to fund an organization that essentially serves trans folks without asking questions. And a
Yeah.
lot of Iowa Trans Mutual Aid is about accessing healthcare, to get to the borders of Iowa and, get it in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Illinois, which is just a horrible thing to say. But, we are also standing
Yeah.
on the shoulders of our, trans queer elders who've been doing this, running drugs from Mexico to get hormones and, all those kinds of things, as well as the abortion rights
Yeah.
movement. I mean, it's bodily autonomy, or as a lot of, the indigenous community says, like, it's body sovereignty,
Yeah.
that is at stake right now. And that's what we're dealing with. So mutual aid is a way to cut across all of that. And Dean Spade wrote a fantastic kind of how to, if people are interested in it. Dean Spade is a trans queer, what are those called, lawyer, who I actually knew in North Carolina for a little bit, and just
Yeah.
have great respect for his work. And, Dean Spade was told to write this book by Miriam Kaba. And I love to talk about that. When I found that out, it made so much sense to me, because here we have Miriam, who is very much so a large living figure in abolition work, talking about, the institutionalized racism and, the carceral system, and how do we build up something better than what we have, to then, say we don't need that anymore because we have something that's so much better, which I think people don't understand about abolitionism is like, or abolition work is like, it is a different vision. It is much more, I think, imaginative and creative as to how do we address harm, because like we
Right.
said earlier, harm's going to happen. How are we
Yeah.
going to handle it? Right. When I heard that she had asked Dean to write this book, this how-to book on mutual aid, that synergy between, here we have trans person, talking about mutual aid and how to get that done, and then abolition work and how are we deconstructing these systems of oppression. It's all the same, it's all
Yeah.
working in the same spheres. So I think that is another way to care for our community that is real and it's here. I hope folks will visit Iowa Trans Mutual Aid. I think there's even an Iowa City Mutual Aid. There's so many different forms of mutual aid that I kind of feel like that's been something that people have done probably since time immemorial. And
Yeah.
right now, though, in our capitalist society and in this culture of scarcity mindset, we need to recognize that it's more so about distribution. And we have like our community pantry, our community fridge that's
Hmm.
just down the street from our Health and Human Services building. There's another one at the Coralville Library, North Liberty. I mean, there's food should be free. I mean,
Yes.
my 7-year-old was like, but I don't understand why food's not free. Like, I know, because people need to eat.
Yeah.
Housing should be safe and affordable and accessible. Just dignity. These things are basic, but that's probably the socialist in me
Yeah.
talking.
Well, you're not alone. I mean, I believe very strongly in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I believe that when we take care of basic needs for each other, I, I know this is going to sound out there. I really do believe that crime would go down,
Mhm,
murder would go down. All of these things that people feel like I have to get.
mhm,
And there's a great explanation that Kimberly Jones does
mm,
about, you know, this idea of why are you burning down the target? And she breaks that down like I've never heard anybody break it down before. In fact, when people ask me, how can I understand systemic and institutionalized racism?
mm,
I recommend her video. And she gets very passionate in it. You can tell that she's upset and she's worried and she's got strong feelings with what's going on. But the way she talks about how we are not looking at each other and how can we help each other, but more how can we hinder each other so that I win? So I'm going to
mhm,
win at your expense.
mhm,
Instead of recognizing that we know people, like take marriage, for instance.
mhm,
We know that people live longer. They tend to be healthier because somebody else is watching out for them. You get better at communicating because you need to communicate in a relationship. So, this
mhm.
this this idea of us taking care of each other and the institution being the safety net, if we saw and did more of that, I don't think that we would be where we are today. And
There's so much data.
oh yeah, yeah.
There's so much research. I mean, it's 100% true. When you looked at in COVID and we had the childcare tax credits, so many people were lifted out of poverty
Mhm.
because their children they were able to have childcare.
Yeah,
And those simple things of like, your child is being cared for in a safer place so that you don't have to worry about it and you can work. Like, granted, it's in a capitalist, structure, but the idea
sure.
is somewhat there, right? I mean, it is a form of universal basic income. I mean, that is 100%. I believe in that. I honestly think that people, if you want to work, you should work. But if you don't want to
Mhm.
work, I don't know why we're working. Like, it's just this culture that we have around working, honestly.
Yeah,
Again, people may think that goes too far. I simply do not. And there are many counties and cities who have signed on to universal basic income as a basic human right because people need to have basic things met
yep,
in order to be successful in life, to be happy,
yeah,
to have dignity and respect
yeah.
for themselves and to care for their family and to be engaged in their community. You can't do that working 4 jobs, you just
Right.
can't,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Especially jobs that, you don't aren't really fulfilling, what you want to do and see and be in the world.
Absolutely.
You know, when I told my parents that I wanted to be an artist when I grew up, that was unacceptable to them because in their minds, artists didn't make money. They were worried about having to support me for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
But I look back And when my own son came to me and said, I want to be an artist, first of all, I was incredibly flattered. But I also said to him very specifically, I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how much money it costs. We will support you in that because I believe in the power of the arts. But I also want my child to know I'd rather you be happy than live in $1 million house.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we don't often say to our kids. And when
Mhm.
you mention about dignity, whenever I hear that word, I always think about someone who said, and I think they interviewed an unhoused person who said the worst part of it is when people walk by you and they won't even look at you. That is the smallest amount we can do
Yeah.
for another human being.
Just
And
to
even
acknowledge.
though it's uncomfortable and you might be scared or whatever the case may be, growing up in high school, we would collect coats, just a bunch of kids, drive to Philadelphia. And when we saw a homeless person on the street, we'd give them a coat. And at Christmas, when I was a practicing Catholic, I would go to midnight mass on Christmas Eve. And the Basilica of St. Peter and Paul in Philadelphia, some of the wealthiest Catholics in Philadelphia would go there. And I would literally watch them walk past a homeless person on the corner. And I just thought, that's not how this is supposed to be.
Mhm.
They shouldn't be made to feel less than because they're struggling, because you could be there tomorrow.
Yeah, put yourself in those shoes.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
I think that is a huge, probably cornerstone of compassion, right? Is to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Um, one thing that is also striking me as we talk about, those that came before us too. I think about my grandmother who she worked 3 shifts. When growing up, she would always kind of mess with me and be like, "How many jobs do you have?" She always said she wanted me to work in food service because then she would know that I had food, which was accurate, actually. I flung a lot of pizza and, but always ate. So she was right. But, that also just kind of going back to that idea of white supremacy culture and adding to that like ancestral trauma. I
Yeah.
think about how what you said was, they also don't get their own life satisfaction of, wanting to be an artist or whatever. And I remember my grandmother telling me she was a huge fan of the San Diego Zoo and we would go all the time. And she gave a lot of money to the San Diego Zoo, more than my grandfather, I think, knew. And she was very secretive, actually. Secretive Filipino lady, watch out. But I remember she told me because she was really much better with plants than she was with people. She was that person that could grow an avocado out of just like the avocado pit with like the, toothpicks and water. And all
Yep.
of a sudden
Yep.
there would be like a tree. I don't understand it. But she told me, she was like, if you've ever been to the San Diego Zoo, it's like half botanical gardens and
Hmm.
half, endangered species. And she just wanted to work there to work in the gardens. And so she told me that she applied. And you know what they told her? You can work in the stitching factory.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
it kills me every time. And I think about that and I think about how I've really gotten into this like work-life balance. I have a professional degree. I, go to an office. I have time with my kids. And I didn't have that with my grandmother. I remember taking naps with her in
Yeah.
between shifts. Those were like sweet times that I had with her. But that ancestral trauma. And so I also wanted to put out there that, Trisha Hersey, Reverend Hersey, she has this Rest is Resistance manifesto.
Yeah.
And I really love that because it is talking about, and she runs this NAP ministry if people haven't heard of it, but it is the, the kind of the ultimate pushback to say, no, I mean, and she's a Black woman and she's just like, I am going to care for myself
Yeah.
because I have to heal not only myself, but those that came before me and
Hmm.
those that will come after me.
Yeah.
And that is so powerful. It's so
Agreed.
powerful. So, I mean, just trying to give folks places to look for these things. I
Hmm.
mean, we could talk all day and all night about this stuff. So I don't want to get too long winded about it, but just to give people, hey, check this out, and look into what are different forms of care and love. And yeah, so I
Yeah.
hope people will look at that.
No is a very powerful word. And
It
I
is.
think for many of us, especially marginalized people,
Mm,
we feel such a sense of, I have to be 10 times better than this non black and brown person next to me.
mm. Yeah, absolutely.
And
The
you
striving.
kill yourself
Yeah.
trying to do that.
Yeah.
I worked at a place for 14 years and I never had a vacation. I went with my family on vacation, but I sat by the pool with a laptop to get work done because I felt that was what I needed to do in order to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
So I
sorry
agree
about
with
that.
you 100%. Naps are great.
Take
Should
them
be
when you
baked
can.
into our workday.
It should be. It should be. Some cultures it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked about a lot of great things. All the things that we mentioned, we'll have links for that in the description. So don't feel like you have to, well, if you want to listen to it over and over again, we're happy for that. But if you don't have to rewind and try to listen and write down all the names that we said, we'll have that at the end. So when we are severely depleted, can we truly engage in fierce love? Or do we just default to survival mode of love?
Yeah, I think that it is difficult to give from an empty cup. So I think that it's recognizing that you have an emptier cup and maybe that's a time to pause
Yeah.
before moving forward. Because we talk about, you asked, can you engage in fierce love or are you just surviving? I do think that sometimes there's times when you have to kind of reach deep down to
Mhm.
deeply listen, to kind of quell your own triggers that are coming up.
Yeah.
I do think it's possible. It's not the best place to be in, though. I think that if you are feeling depleted, um, that's probably a time to go take a nap
Yeah.
and to find some form of joy. Go play with your kids. Go today, actually, I spent 10 minutes from between meetings and I ran outside and I found a beautiful sun kissed fall tree and I just laid in a pile of leaves. And I
Nice.
only had 10 minutes, but I'll
Yeah.
tell you, I thought about that moment like the rest of my day and I could smell the sweetness of the leaves and the earth
Yeah.
and I could see the wind moving in like there's just try and be less depleted
Yeah.
and fill your cup. You can't give from an empty cup. That would
Yeah.
be my suggestion there.
Awesome. Love it. Wrapping it up and
Yeah.
kind of getting towards the end, we want to establish a tradition, if you will. V does this on their Substack. So, do you have 3 with V for us?
Through with me. I know I love that. It's so funny. Well, I think first and foremost, I hope people will check out some of these links because I do think there's a wealth of information out there, and this is certainly not all of it, but a good place to start. So I would
Mhm.
just encourage folks to check out some of the links here if you're curious about some of the things that we've talked about. And of course, always send us a note, send us a message. The second thing is get outside. I don't know when you're listening to this or where you are, but our connection to something bigger than ourselves is a very humbling experience and it's a very human experience. And I think that oftentimes there's so much coming at us, or whether that's your daily life or the political noise, you need to unplug and you need to just take that time to, if you can't be outside, then to focus on your breath. And I'm really trying to just give a daily practice of, challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Can I commit to this one thing? I mean, I know Adrienne Marie Brown has been talking about, and if you don't know her, we'll put some of her stuff in there and we can talk about her for a whole podcast. But in her work, but she's been talking to a tree and talking to living, other living beings around.
Mhm.
And if you start to generate that kind of relationship, what does that look like after 6 months? What does that look like after a year? So all that is to say, get outside of yourself.
Yeah.
Let's not take ourselves too
And
seriously.
I'll just add, leave the town you grew up in.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. If you can do that, do that. Get
Yeah.
way out. And then I think the third thing really, you know, find somebody that you haven't connected to in a long time, or, somebody that maybe you missed in the supermarket, you saw them far away. Um, and just reach out, just challenge yourself to kind of get outside of your comfort zone, or um, reconnect with an old friend or something. But now in this day and age, I think that it is important to make sure that we do stay connected. I
Mhm.
can be very much so the person that's like, I will talk with the people that are in front of me, and then I forget to like send a voicemail or recall a friend or write a letter. Oh my God. My kids are like, what are you
When's the
doing? I'm
last
like,
time you wrote a letter?
yeah. No, they're like, and how do you know where to send it and what to get? And I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. So yeah, just challenge yourself to reach out and connect with another. And, I think that it doesn't, we're doing this podcast and it could be political, but I think that we're just trying to be human. What
Yeah,
are some good, like, human things we can do? So that's kind of the 3 with V. Keep it simple.
yeah.
Keep it simple. Yeah, I hope people are taking care of themselves.
I love that. I love it. I'm sure both of us have seen instances where I'll be walking through the parking lot somewhere and I see some lady who's dressed really smart and I love the shoes. I'm a shoeaholic. And I'll stop, and for a minute I'm like, I shouldn't say anything. And then I'm like, you know what? We need to lift each other up in
Yeah.
any way that we can.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I love your shoes. Where'd you get those? You could see her face light up. Her whole demeanor changed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of power in not only a stranger, also
Mhm.
your friends and people that you know and love and care for, but giving out compliments and letting somebody know that you see them can be life changing for somebody. You just never
Absolutely.
know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I can't wait for us to find another topic and do it again, hopefully soon. But
Yep.
thanks for tuning in and listening to the call. We really appreciate you being here. Like we said, we'll drop everything that we referenced in the description. Love it if you would subscribe or at least like this podcast. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. V, as always, I love you. Thank you for
I
being
love
in my
you.
life. Thank you for being so amazing. You fill my cup. Hopefully, I
Yeah.
fill your cup. Hopefully, we filled
Cheers.
some other people's cup tonight, or when we're recording this. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So much love. Thank you.
same, same. Take care of yourselves, everybody.